The wind in Dawan that morning whispered like a secret carried by angels, brushing softly against the windows of St. Mirabel Hospital. Inside, Olivia clutched the metal bedrail as another contraction slammed into her with the force of a hammer against iron. Her cries rose and fell in the sterile air, curling up to the ceiling like smoke from a burning altar. Each breath she took felt borrowed, as though she was bargaining with heaven for one more minute of strength. Around her, the nurses moved like shadows, their voices muffled by the rhythm of monitors beeping. But her ears strained for a different sound, a ringtone that never came. Her phone sat cold on the metal side table, a motionless slab of glass and silence. 9 hours earlier, she had called Raymond to tell him the baby was coming. He didn't answer. 4 missed calls. 2 voicemails. No reply. Now she was alone in a room meant for 2. Every time the pain passed, she looked toward the door, hoping to see the man who once whispered promises at her belly, who had named the baby Ethan before his tiny heart even fluttered on the scan. But all she saw was absence, a cold, cruel absence that wrapped itself around her like chains. Her mother had once told her that during labor a woman sees death and bargains with life. But Olivia realized then that she wasn't just laboring a child, she was laboring a farewell, birthing her strength through betrayal. Another contraction ripped through her like a jagged blade dragged across a soft curtain, and she bit her lip to stop a scream that threatened to shatter her spine. Her body arched against the sheets, the sweat soaking through the hospital gown until it clung like a second skin. The nurse, Teresa, leaned over her, dabbing her forehead with a cloth and whispering, "You're doing well, just hold on." But Olivia wasn't holding on, she was unraveling. Her thoughts were not in that room, but running down memory lane, through the corridors of the love she once shared with Raymond. She remembered their wedding day, the way he looked at her when he vowed to protect and cherish her, how he cried when they found out she was pregnant. Yet now the man who once laid hands on her belly in prayer had vanished like smoke in a storm. As she gasped for breath, she reached again for the phone, desperate for a sliver of hope. It buzzed once. Her heart leapt like a startled deer. She opened it, and the words sliced through her like poisoned arrows. "You're dead to me. Don't contact me again." In that moment, Olivia stopped breathing. Her heart didn't break. It shattered into pieces so small that no apology could ever piece them together again. The phone fell from her hand with a soft thud, and her soul collapsed beside it. "Even my close friend, someone I trusted, one who shared my bread, has turned against me," she whispered in a breathless sob, quoting Psalm 41 verse 9 without realizing it. Teresa picked the phone off the floor, her face darkening as she read the message, but she said nothing. Instead, she took Olivia's hand and held it tightly. That silent act of kindness was more comfort than 1,000 words. When the time came, Olivia bore down with every ounce of strength she had left in her weary bones. Her screams echoed through the maternity ward, rising higher with each push, like a wounded bird clawing its way through a stormy sky. Nurses crowded around her, urging her on, their voices blurring together until they were one long cry of encouragement. Then a baby's cry broke through, loud, sharp, full of defiance. Olivia collapsed against the pillows, her chest heaving like a battlefield after war. The child was placed on her chest, slick and warm, his cries vibrating against her skin like a sacred hymn. She looked at him, eyes blurry with tears, and whispered, "Ethan." That single name carried all her pain, all her hope, all her strength. For a moment, everything was silent. Even her heartbeat seemed to pause as she looked into his face. She kissed his forehead and closed her eyes, whispering a verse that had carried her through countless nights. "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." Psalm 27 verse 10. She wasn't sure if it was the labor, the heartbreak, or both that had drained her soul, but in that moment, holding her son, she knew she had crossed a line she could never return from. Raymond was no longer her husband. He was a stranger with a cruel mouth and a coward soul. She wouldn't grieve him. Not anymore. Her tears were for her son now, for the journey ahead, for the days when she would have to explain his father's silence with grace instead of anger. But that day would come later. For now, Ethan needed her, and she needed to heal. The evening stretched its arms across Dawan like an old man settling into a rocking chair. Olivia lay in bed, cradling Ethan, whose small breaths soothed her like a balm on scorched earth. Teresa, ever faithful, brought her warm water and yam porridge, humming an old Igbo lullaby her grandmother used to sing. The melody wrapped around the room like a soft shawl. Outside, birds were retreating into trees, and the sky bore a color somewhere between sorrow and surrender. Olivia looked at her baby and traced the curve of his cheek with a trembling finger. "I don't know what tomorrow holds," she whispered, "but I know the one who holds me." Teresa nodded solemnly. "God never abandons his daughters. You may be wounded, but you're not defeated." The words settled deep in Olivia's chest, nesting there like birds building a home. The phone lay on the table now, face down, forgotten. Its betrayal buried for now beneath the new life resting in her arms. Her body was sore, her soul stitched together by hope and exhaustion, but she wasn't broken. Not completely. Not anymore. As the clock ticked softly in the corner and the ward quieted around her, Olivia made a silent vow she would rise. Not for Raymond, not for revenge, but for Ethan and for herself, because the valley was deep, but the God she served was deeper. And as Isaiah 43 verse 2 whispered once more in her heart, "When you pass through the fire, you shall not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon you," she knew. She had passed through fire and came out whole. The days that followed Ethan's birth passed in fragments, like broken glass glittering under sunlight. Olivia moved through them as if underwater, her limbs heavy, her heart numb. Raymond had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but his cruel words and a cold silence that echoed louder than any scream. The house she returned to after the hospital was no longer a home. It was a hollow structure packed with memories that clawed at her like stray cats in the dark. His clothes were gone, his shoes missing from the rack, and even the wedding photo that once sat on the mantel had been removed, as if her existence had been erased. What he didn't take were the bills. What he left behind was a mountain of debt, unpaid rent, and a landlord who had run out of patience. With her stitches barely healed and a newborn in her arms, Olivia faced eviction like a soldier with no shield. Her cries at night were not just for Ethan's feedings, but for herself. There were nights she looked at the ceiling and wondered if she would survive this valley. But even in those shadows, the faint whisper of Psalm 34 verse 18 remained. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." She held on to that verse like a woman clinging to driftwood in the middle of a stormy sea. Stripped of comfort and dignity, Olivia packed her things in silence and moved into a one-room apartment in the outskirts of Dewan. It was far from the polished neighborhood she once called home. The new place was small, barely wide enough for her bed and a wooden crib she had bought secondhand. But it was hers. She swept the dusty floor with the same care a mother would give to dressing her child. Every corner she scrubbed felt like a declaration. "I will rise from this." With no job and no support, Olivia remembered a skill her late aunt had taught her as a girl, needlework. She dug out her old manual sewing machine from storage, oiled its stiff joints, and set it by the window where sunlight could guide her stitches. At first, she sewed little things, mending neighbors' blouses, altering dresses for church women, fixing zippers. Payment came in coins and favors, sometimes a plate of food, sometimes diapers for Ethan. But Olivia never turned away a task, no matter how small. Her hands, once adorned with rings and perfume, were now calloused from thread and scissors, but she wore her toil like a badge. The neighbors began to talk about the woman who was abandoned yet didn't beg, who stitched her survival one garment at a time. Slowly, her reputation began to ripple across Dewan like sunrise, warming the corners of a cold village. The book of Proverbs reminded her daily, "She works with eager hands. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come." And though she wasn't laughing yet, she was no longer crying. One afternoon, while repairing the frayed hem of a customer's Ankara skirt, a tall woman entered her tiny shop unannounced. Her presence filled the room like a sudden gust of wind. She introduced herself as Miss Janice, the owner of one of Dewan's most prestigious boutiques. She had heard of Olivia through a client whose wedding gown Olivia had altered at the last minute when the original seamstress failed. "That gown was cleaner than my own heartbeat," the client had said. Miss Janice watched Olivia work for a while, eyes narrowed not in suspicion but in admiration. "You've got gold in your fingers," she said. "I've seen trained tailors do less with more." That moment became a turning point. Miss Janice offered Olivia a small contract, 5 skirts for her boutique. Olivia sewed like a woman possessed, each stitch a prayer, each fold of fabric a testament of endurance. The boutique customers took notice, and within weeks, Olivia's designs began appearing on mannequins behind glass windows she used to walk past with envy. With each completed order, her name spread like wildfire in the fashion circles of Dalwan. Her first real paycheck came folded inside a brown envelope, and when she opened it, tears fell freely, not just for the money, but for the dignity it restored. She knelt on the concrete floor, held Ethan close, and whispered, "See what the Lord has done." Her heart danced with the melody of Joel 2 verse 25. "I will restore to you the years the locust has eaten." For Olivia, restoration had come not in thunder, but in the quiet hum of a sewing machine. Years passed, but Olivia never forgot the scent of betrayal. Yet instead of letting it embitter her, she allowed it to mold her. The small shop grew into a boutique, and the boutique grew into a brand, Olivia Wears Inc., a company known for bold patterns and elegant stitches. Ethan grew with it, a child as wise as he was cheerful. Olivia never spoke ill of his father, choosing instead to fill his ears with bedtime stories of heroes and underdogs who conquered odds. Her hands no longer trembled when she saw a man who resembled Raymond in the market. Her smile became genuine again, no longer strained by effort. Then, in the 4th year of her boutique's expansion, Nicholas came into her life. A logistics expert with a gentle voice and eyes that saw beyond scars, Nicholas met Olivia while helping her source fabric from a neighboring city. Where Raymond had whispered promises and vanished, Nicholas showed up every time, every season, every morning. He loved Ethan like flesh of his own flesh and held Olivia's hand like a man cradling a crown. When he asked her to marry him, she didn't answer immediately. She sat with God for 3 days, seeking peace. On the 4th morning, while watching Ethan laugh in his new school uniform, she said yes, not out of fear of loneliness, but because she recognized in Nicholas the love she had once begged for. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 sang in her soul, "He has made everything beautiful in its time." The woman who had once been texted into emotional death was now alive, thriving, and building an empire, not out of vengeance, but out of grace. The sky over Dalwan on that Monday morning looked neither promising nor threatening. It was the kind of sky that wore no emotion, much like Olivia herself as she walked into the headquarters of Olivia Wears Inc., the fashion house that bore her pain-turned purpose. Dressed in a tailored green kaftan that swept behind her like a whisper of power, she carried herself with the quiet authority of a woman who had been through the fire and come out gold. Her staff stood when she entered, offering smiles filled with admiration. Olivia nodded politely and walked into her office, her heels clicking against the tiled floor like punctuation marks in a declaration of grace. She had just finished reviewing a supplier's invoice when her assistant, Miranda, knocked gently and peeked in with hesitation stitched across her face. "Ma'am, there's a man waiting in reception. He said he's here for the operations manager vacancy. But he insisted on handing his CV to you personally." Olivia looked up. "What's his name?" Miranda hesitated. Raymond Ajayi." The air in the room stilled. For a moment, Olivia felt the world fold in on itself, like a page turning unexpectedly in the middle of a sentence. Her hand remained frozen above her desk, and then slowly, deliberately, she placed the pen down. "Tell him I'll be with him shortly." As the door closed, Olivia sat back, staring at nothing. Life, it seemed, had an appetite for irony. The man who once told her she was dead to him was now seeking resurrection from her table. When she finally walked into the lounge where applicants waited, she scanned the room until her eyes found him. Raymond. Time had not been kind. The once vibrant man who paraded around in crisp shirts and arrogance now sat hunched in a plastic chair, his shoulders sagging like forgotten curtains. His clothes were wrinkled, shoes dusty, and his face bore lines that hardship had carved with ruthless hands. He stood up when he saw her, the shock in his eyes barely masked by a forced smile. "Olivia," he said, as if her name still had a place in his mouth. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me." She smiled, a controlled, unreadable smile. I remember everyone who taught me lessons. He chuckled awkwardly, reaching for his CV. I heard your company was hiring. I thought I'd try. His voice, once brimming with ego, now quivered like a child's kite in rough wind. Olivia sat across from him, legs crossed, fingers laced. She studied him, not with anger, but with a kind of emotional detachment one feels toward an old wound that no longer hurts but has left a scar. "What brings you here, Raymond?" she asked, though she already knew. Life had stripped him bare, and now he stood like a man seeking shelter from a storm he created. "Sheila left," he muttered. "Took what little I had. Things didn't go the way I expected." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Life has a funny way of giving us exactly what we invest in it. You planted betrayal, and now, harvest time." He looked away, ashamed. "I made mistakes." "Mistakes are when you spill tea, Raymond. You didn't make mistakes. You made decisions." The silence that followed was thick, like fog before a heavy rain. Raymond looked around, visibly shrinking under the weight of his own decisions. Olivia leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, voice low and firm. "You walked out on me when I was fighting for my life on that hospital bed. You didn't just abandon me, you erased me. And now you're here, asking me to forget it all because time hasn't been kind to you." Her words landed like stones skipping across a still lake, each one leaving a ripple of truth. "I'm not angry anymore," she continued. "Time and God have healed what you broke. But I'm not a woman who keeps her past around to haunt her future." Raymond's eyes glistened. He opened his mouth but couldn't speak. Olivia rose from her seat and adjusted the cuff of her sleeve. "I've moved on, Raymond. I have a husband who knows my worth and a son who calls him daddy without confusion in his voice. Nicholas won't be comfortable having you here. And more importantly, neither will I." Raymond stood, defeated. "So you won't even give me a chance?" Olivia paused. "I just did. I gave you the dignity of a conversation. That's more than you gave me when I needed you most." She motioned toward the exit. "I don't wish you harm, but your place is not here." Raymond walked out of the building like a man carrying the weight of his own shadow. Olivia stood at her window, watching him melt into the crowd outside like a ghost returning to its grave. There was no triumph in her heart, no drum roll of revenge, just silence. And in that silence, peace. She turned away from the glass and walked toward the conference room where Nicholas was waiting to discuss expansion into a new market. As she entered, he stood and kissed her cheek gently. "You okay?" he asked, reading her face like a familiar book. She nodded. An old chapter tried to reopen itself. "I closed it." He smiled, the kind of smile that said, "You don't have to explain." As they sat together, discussing strategy and planning the future, Olivia felt something lift from her spirit, a final thread severed. She had forgiven Raymond not because he deserved it, but because she deserved freedom. Micah 7 verse 8 circled in her heart like a hymn. "Do not gloat over me, my enemy. Though I have fallen, I will rise." And indeed she had risen, not with rage, but with grace. Her throne wasn't built on bitterness, but on broken pieces she had learned to rearrange into a masterpiece. She didn't need Raymond to acknowledge her worth. She had lived it. She had stitched it into every fiber of her being, every thread of her business, and every heartbeat of her son. That was her answer, her testimony, and her legacy. The air in Olivia's office was still when the door finally closed behind Raymond. A kind of stillness that didn't feel like silence, but rather like the moment right after a storm passes, the trees no longer swaying, the wind no longer wailing, just calm. Olivia stood at the window for a long time, her gaze locked on nothing in particular. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel sorrow. She felt finished. The final page of a story she never asked to be written had been turned, and the book now rested closed in her spirit. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, one that felt like it had been sitting in her chest since that text message in the hospital years ago. For a fleeting moment, memories fluttered, softer now, less sharp. The sound of Raymond's laughter when he first held the son he never returned for. The promises whispered in the warm light of their former bedroom. But those were echoes, and echoes, no matter how loud they return, are still just shadows of a voice. She touched her necklace gently, a small gold pendant Ethan had chosen for her on Mother's Day. "You're my gold star," he had said. That was all the reminder she needed. Her value wasn't in Raymond's recognition. It was in the life she had built with bare hands and a burning heart. She turned away from the glass, rolled her shoulders back, and headed for the door. There was more work to be done, and she refused to look back. Even Lot's wife had turned to salt for doing so. Nicholas had just returned from a meeting when Olivia entered the lounge area of the executive floor. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms speckled with ink from a busted pen, evidence of a long day. But when he saw her, his face softened. "All done?" he asked gently. She nodded and crossed to him, resting her head briefly on his shoulder. "He came," he asked. I said no. Nicholas didn't pry. He never did. He simply cupped her chin and kissed her forehead, whispering, "I'm proud of you." That moment, quiet and sacred, became a sanctuary for Olivia. She had once cried in the arms of loneliness. Now she stood wrapped in the comfort of love that had never tried to fix her, but simply held her while she healed. Ethan barged into the lounge minutes later, his school backpack hanging sideways as he shouted excitedly about a class project. Nicholas scooped him up with ease, and Olivia watched them, father and son not by blood, but by bond. The kind forged in the fires of choice, not accident. Ethan's laughter bounced off the high ceiling like wind chimes in a breeze, and in it, Olivia heard her own laughter returning slowly to her chest, little by little. As she leaned back into the plush armchair, her phone buzzed. A text from Raymond. It read simply, "Thank you for listening." She smiled faintly, typed back, "I forgave you long ago, but some doors are best left closed." Then she deleted the conversation and blocked the number. Some chapters weren't just closed, they were sealed with peace. Later that evening, the house glowed with the warmth of soft lighting and the scent of simmering egusi soup. Olivia stood at the kitchen counter, stirring with practiced grace, while Nicholas set the table and Ethan chased their cat under the chairs. Laughter mixed with the clatter of cutlery, forming the kind of music Olivia once feared she'd never hear in her life again. After dinner, as they sat curled on the couch, watching a nature documentary Ethan insisted was super important, Olivia leaned her head against Nicholas's shoulder. He slipped his hand into hers without a word, their fingers locking together like puzzle pieces that had always been meant to fit. The journey hadn't been easy. It had been marred with loss, steeped in betrayal, and paved with sleepless nights. But now, in the stillness of their living room, she knew it had all led here. God had not only restored her joy, he had refined it. What Raymond broke in cruelty, God rebuilt in compassion. Olivia reached for her Bible on the side table, flipping to Isaiah 61 verse 7 and reading aloud. "Instead of your shame you shall have double honor, and instead of confusion they shall rejoice in their portion." She closed the book gently, the verse resting in her spirit like balm. Ethan leaned against her, half asleep, and Nicholas whispered, "You're everything I ever prayed for." She didn't respond. She just smiled because some promises don't need words. They just need to be lived. The next morning, sunlight spilled into their bedroom like honey pouring from the lips of dawn. Olivia woke slowly, the air smelling faintly of lavender and the promise of another peaceful day. She stepped onto the balcony, her silk robe fluttering softly as she sipped her tea and watched the city of Dewan stir awake beneath her. Vendors calling out wares, horns blaring in the distance, birds stretching their wings across the skyline. Somewhere in that buzz, Olivia felt deeply grounded. She had nothing to prove anymore. She had weathered rejection, rebuilt from rubble, and emerged not just standing, but standing tall. Her phone rang. It was a conference call with a Paris-based retailer interested in her brand. She answered with poise, her voice smooth and confident, even as Ethan ran into the room with his sketch pad full of superhero designs. Nicholas followed behind with coffee in hand, grinning. "Your son's convinced you're Wonder Woman." Olivia laughed, only without the cape. But in her heart, she knew the truth. She had fought battles no one had seen. She had buried tears beneath smiles. And she had dared to dream again when it felt safer not to. As the call ended and she stood surrounded by the people she loved, Olivia whispered a prayer of gratitude, not loud, not long, just enough to say, "Thank you for never letting go." Her story was no fairy tale, but it was hers. and it was more beautiful than anything she could have ever imagined from a hospital bed all those years ago. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you today, lifting up every listener who has walked through the valley of sorrow, who has cried in secret, who has been told they are dead to someone they once trusted. Lord, you see every tear, every wound, every betrayal hidden beneath smiling faces. You are the God who binds up the brokenhearted and restores what the enemy tried to scatter. And so today, we call on your name, Jehovah Rapha, our healer. Come and touch every soul listening right now. Father, for the woman who labored through pain alone, for the man abandoned in his darkest hour, for the heart that was once whole but now feels shattered, we ask for supernatural strength. Not the kind the world gives, but the kind that rises even when circumstances say you should stay down. Your word says in Psalm 34, verse 18, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." So Lord, be close. Wrap your arms around your sons and daughters. Let them know you never left, even when everyone else did. Teach us, O Lord, to stand tall like Olivia did, not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but because we trust you are our vindicator. Your word declares in Joel 2, verse 25, "I will restore to you the years the locust has eaten." Restore peace, restore dignity, restore joy, restore identity. And while the world may say we are forgotten, you call us chosen, loved, and redeemed. You said in Isaiah 61, verse 7, that instead of shame, you will give us double honor. Let that be the portion of every listener right now. And finally, Lord, give them grace to forgive. Not because the pain wasn't real, but because freedom is found in letting go. Let them rise, not with bitterness in their chest, but with purpose in their steps. Surround them with godly support, with divine connections, and with new beginnings that silence every voice that said they wouldn't make it. Let them know that in you, dead things live again, not as they were, but better, stronger, wiser. For you are the God who makes all things beautiful in your time. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.